Duke's growl pierced the nursery's darkness, low and menacing. Robert Carson froze in the doorway, watching as the German shepherd's hackles rose, his powerful body rigid with tension. Something was wrong. Through the window, lightning briefly illuminated the nursery, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. For 2 weeks this inexplicable ritual had repeated nightly, their once gentle dog transforming into a sentinel of warning, eyes fixed on the corner of their baby's room, sensing something no human could detect. The storm intensified outside their 19th century Vermont farmhouse, rain lashing against ancient windows as wooden beams creaked overhead. Robert's heart pounded. What did Duke sense in that innocent-looking corner? As another flash of lightning revealed his 3-month-old son, sleeping peacefully in his crib, Robert couldn't shake the bone-deep certainty that something dangerous lurked in the shadows of their dream home. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Robert stepped fully into the nursery, careful to keep his footsteps light on the old wooden floor. It was nearly midnight, and Eleanor had finally fallen asleep after grading papers until late. He didn't want to wake her with yet another conversation about Duke's strange behavior. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, placing a gentle hand on Duke's back. The dog's muscles remained taut under his touch, and the growl continued, unwavering. Duke had been a member of their family for 5 years, ever since Robert had adopted him from the search and rescue program, where Duke had served with distinction until an injury forced his retirement. Their bond had been instant and profound. After all, Duke had saved Robert's life during the devastating New England floods that had claimed dozens of lives. Robert still remembered being trapped in his car as floodwaters rose, the vehicle gradually sinking into the churning current. Duke had appeared like a specter through the rain, swimming powerfully against the current, guiding the rescuers directly to him. When Robert later learned that the heroic dog needed a home, the decision was immediate and unwavering. Through the years, Duke had proven himself to be gentle, loyal, and exceptionally intelligent. When William was born 3 months ago, any concerns about how Duke might react to a baby in the house had quickly evaporated. The German shepherd had appointed himself William's personal guardian, lying beside the crib during naps, his tail gently wagging whenever the infant made a sound. But 2 weeks ago, something had changed. Robert crossed to the window, watching, as another sheet of rain swept across their 5 acres of Vermont countryside. The old farmhouse had seemed perfect when they purchased it 4 months ago. A place to raise their son away from the bustle of city life. A fresh start after Robert's architectural career had been derailed by a failed project and subsequent crisis of confidence. He peered through the watery glass at the silhouette of Martha Simmons's Os's house next door. The lights were still on despite the late hour. Martha, at 78, often complained of insomnia. The retired nurse had lived in her house for over 40 years and had welcomed them warmly to the rural community, bringing homemade bread and local honey as housewarming gifts. Martha had taken a particular shine to Duke, often bringing him special treats and talking to him as if he were an old friend. "This one's special," she'd said, her weathered hands scratching behind Duke's ears. "He's got the knowing in him." Robert turned back to the nursery. Duke remained fixated on the corner, his growl maintaining the same deep, warning tone. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of his protector's distress. With a sigh, Robert dropped to his knees beside Duke, following the dog's gaze to the corner where 2 exterior walls met. He'd checked it thoroughly multiple times over the past 2 weeks. The windows were securely latched, the screens intact, and there were no signs of pests. He'd even removed the baseboard and inspected behind it, finding nothing but decades-old dust. "There's nothing there, Duke," he whispered, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. Duke's ears twitched at Robert's words, but his position remained unchanged. If anything, his growl deepened. Robert ran his fingers through his hair, exhaustion washing over him. During the day, Duke behaved normally, playing in the yard, accompanying Eleanor on walks with the baby stroller, and napping in patches of sunlight. It was only at night that this transformation occurred, always focused on the same corner, always with the same unwavering intensity. Eleanor had suggested taking Duke to the veterinarian, wondering if he might be experiencing discomfort or anxiety that made him act this way. The examination had revealed nothing unusual. Duke was in perfect health for a 7-year-old German Shepherd. Dogs sometimes react to changes in their environment that humans can't detect, Dr. Abigail Winters had explained, like subtle sounds or shifts in air pressure. The veterinarian had known Duke since his rescue dog days, having treated his injuries after the building collapse that ended his working career. As a soft whimper escaped William, Robert moved to the crib. The baby shifted in his sleep, tiny fingers curling and uncurling. Robert adjusted the light blanket, his architect's eyes automatically scanning the ceiling above, looking for any signs of water damage or structural issues, a habit from his professional life that he couldn't shake. "I should be the one protecting him," Robert whispered, guilt washing over him. His career setback had struck at the core of his identity. He designed structures meant to shelter and protect people. When one of his buildings had shown signs of structural compromise, despite having passed all inspections, the professional fallout had been devastating. Though no one had been injured, the near miss haunted him. A particularly loud thunderclap shook the old windows, and William stirred again but didn't wake. Duke briefly looked at the baby before returning his attention to the corner, his posture communicating unmistakable vigilance. Robert's cell phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Eleanor. "Everything okay?" Heard Duke growling again. He typed back, "All fine, just checking on them. Go back to sleep." Robert knew they should discuss moving William's crib into their bedroom until they figured out what was bothering Duke. But the conversation would inevitably lead to another disagreement. Eleanor, initially skeptical of Duke's behavior, had begun to trust the dog's instincts after witnessing his consistent pattern night after night. "What do you see, boy?" Robert whispered, a chill running down his spine despite the warm spring evening. "What are you trying to tell us?" The baby mobile above William's crib began to turn slowly, activated by a draft that Robert could now feel, subtle but definitely present. He frowned, certain he'd sealed all the windows properly. Outside, the rain intensified, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the Vermont hills. Duke's growl maintained its steady warning, his eyes never leaving that corner of the room. Robert patted Duke's head, receiving a brief tail wag in response, though the dog's attention remained fixed on his self-appointed mission. "Good boy," Robert whispered, grateful for his loyal companion's dedication to protecting their family. As he reluctantly prepared to leave the nursery, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that Duke was desperately trying to communicate something important, something urgent. And deep in his heart, Robert knew he needed to listen. Morning sunlight streamed through the nursery windows, transforming the room that had seemed so ominous the night before. Duke lay peacefully in a patch of sunshine near William's crib, his tail thumping gently against the wooden floor as Eleanor fed the baby. No sign remained of the tense, growling sentinel from the night before. "He's doing it again, isn't he?" Eleanor asked, not looking up from William. "Every night now." Robert leaned against the doorframe, coffee mug clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Like clockwork, same corner, same growl. "And you still can't find anything wrong?" Eleanor's voice held a slight edge of frustration. "I've checked everything I can think of," Robert said. "There's nothing there, Eleanor. At least, nothing I can see." Eleanor placed William against her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Maybe it's jealousy? I've read that pets can get territorial when babies arrive." "After 3 months, and Duke has been nothing but gentle with William from day one." Robert shook his head. "This is something else." "Then what do you suggest?" Eleanor asked, her patience wearing thin after 2 weeks of interrupted nights. Should we just ignore it and hope it goes away? I think we should take Duke to see Dr. Winters again, Robert said. Maybe she missed something. Eleanor nodded, though her expression remained troubled. As a high school English teacher, she prided herself on logic and reason, but Duke's behavior defied rational explanation. She looked down at Duke, who gazed back with clear, intelligent eyes. There was no aggression there, only what seemed like concern. I just want to keep William safe, she whispered. Duke wants that too, Robert replied softly. That's what's so strange about this. He's not acting threatening. He's acting protective. That afternoon, they sat in Dr. Winters' examination room as she thoroughly checked Duke for a second time. The German Shepherd remained calm under her experienced hands, showing no signs of discomfort or anxiety. Dr. Winters, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, had known Duke longer than the Carsons had. She'd treated him after the building collapse that ended his search and rescue career and had facilitated his adoption when he needed a home. Physically, he's in excellent condition, she concluded, stepping back from the examination table. No pain, no physical abnormalities, no signs of neurological issues. But something's clearly bothering him, Robert insisted. Every night, same time, same corner. Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully, scratching Duke behind the ears. Dogs perceive the world very differently than we do. Their hearing ranges extend far beyond human capacity. They can detect ultrasonic sounds we'll never hear. Their sense of smell is thousands of times more sensitive than ours. So, you think he's sensing something in that corner? Eleanor asked. I think it's very possible, Doctor, Winters replied. Dogs, especially those with Duke's training background, are extremely sensitive to their environments. Sometimes the best protectors don't speak our language. They communicate in the only ways they can. On the drive home, they passed Martha Simmons walking along the country road. Robert pulled over, and Martha approached the car with a basket of freshly picked apples. How's our handsome boy today? She asked, reaching through the window to pat Duke. We just took him to the vet, Eleanor explained. He's been acting strangely at night. Martha's weathered face grew serious. Growling at the nursery corner? Robert and Eleanor exchanged surprised glances. How did you know? Robert asked. The walls between our homes aren't as thick as you might think, Martha said. I hear him sometimes, and I've seen how he watches that corner of your house from my garden. Do you have any idea what might be causing it? Eleanor asked. Martha was silent for a moment, her eyes distant. My late husband Thomas was a master carpenter. He always said old houses speak to those willing to listen. She handed them the basket of apples. I lost my granddaughter 30 years ago when a ceiling collapsed during a storm. Since then, I've paid close attention to what houses try to tell us. That evening, after putting William to bed, Robert and Eleanor sat at their kitchen table, tension thick between them. I think we should move the crib into our room, Eleanor said firmly, just until we figure this out. And ignore what Duke's trying to tell us, Robert countered. What if there is something wrong with that corner? Like what, Robert? You've checked it thoroughly. What could possibly... I don't know. Robert's voice rose in frustration. But I missed something once before, and I won't do it again. Eleanor reached across the table to take his hand, understanding the reference to his professional setback. This isn't the same situation, isn't it? My job is to make sure structures are safe. Our home should be the safest place of all. Their conversation was interrupted by Duke's bark from upstairs. Not his usual evening growl, but a sharp, urgent sound. They rushed to the nursery to find Duke standing over William's crib, ears forward, eyes fixed on the corner where the exterior walls met. And this time, even Robert could hear it, a faint but distinct creaking sound, like wood under strain. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's eerie creaking had been nothing more than imagination. Duke lay stretched out in the living room, basking in a sunbeam, looking entirely unbothered by whatever had troubled him hours before. "I don't understand," Eleanor said, watching him from the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. "It's like he's two different dogs, completely normal during the day and a nervous sentinel at night." Robert sat at the kitchen table, laptop open to an article about old house maintenance. Dr. Winters said dogs can detect subtle environmental changes. Maybe something happens in that corner when the temperature drops at night. Eleanor placed a mug of coffee in front of him and sat down with William in her arms. "Tell me about Duke's past again, his search and rescue days." Robert closed his laptop. He was trained from puppyhood for disaster response, specialized in finding people trapped in collapsed buildings or flood situations. "Like when he found you," Eleanor said softly. Robert nodded, his mind drifting back to that terrifying day 5 years ago. He'd been driving back from a client meeting when the flash flood hit, water rising so quickly that his car was swept off the road before he could reach higher ground. As water filled the vehicle, he'd managed to crack a window but couldn't fully escape. "I was trapped for nearly 3 hours, Robert recalled. "The current was too strong for the rescue teams to reach me directly. They were searching the wrong area until Duke picked up my scent. He swam against the current and led them straight to me. Without him, I wouldn't have made it." "And that's when you learned he was being retired?" "Yeah. A month later, I saw a news story about rescue dogs being adopted out after service. Duke had been injured during a building collapse, his last mission. He'd found a child trapped in a basement, but while leading rescuers back, part of the structure gave way. He saved the child, but nearly died himself." Eleanor looked down at Duke with newfound appreciation. "And he still has all those instincts." "Search and rescue dogs are trained to detect the subtlest signs, changes in air currents, the sound of breathing through layers of debris, even the specific smell of structural materials under stress," Robert explained. "Duke was exceptional even among working dogs. Won a medal for saving 7 people during those floods." William made a small sound, and Duke immediately lifted his head, ears forward, attention locked on the baby. When Eleanor adjusted William's position, Duke relaxed, dropping his head back to his paws, but keeping his eyes on the infant. "He's been like that with William from the beginning," Eleanor marveled. "Remember when we first brought William home? I was so nervous about how Duke would react." Robert smiled at the memory. "And all he did was sniff him once, then lie down beside the bassinet like he'd been guarding babies his whole life. He alerts us before the baby monitor sometimes," Eleanor added. "He knows when William's about to wake up before he makes a sound." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Martha stood on their porch, a leather-bound album under her arm. "I thought you might like to see these," she said, settling into their living room sofa. "Photos of your house from years ago." The album contained black and white photographs dating back to the 1890s, showing their farmhouse through various stages of its existence. Martha pointed to pictures from the 1930s. "There was a fire that destroyed part of the original structure," she explained. "They rebuilt this section where your nursery is now, but the foundation remained the same." "And you mentioned it was renovated again in the 1970s? Robert asked, studying the images carefully. "Modernized, yes. Indoor plumbing, updated electrical, that sort of thing." Martha turned the page to show renovation photos. "The family who owned it then made quite a few changes, not all of them properly documented, according to Thomas. My husband helped with some of the carpentry." Duke had risen from his spot and came to sit beside Martha, leaning gently against her leg. "He likes you," Eleanor observed. "We understand each other," Martha said, patting Duke's head. "Don't we, old friend?" As Martha continued showing them photographs, Robert and Eleanor began documenting Duke's behavior in a notebook. When his growling started each evening, how long it lasted, and any environmental factors that might be relevant. "It's most intense after rainy days," Robert noted a week later, reviewing their observations. "And when the temperature drops significantly at night." "What does that tell us?" Eleanor asked. "I'm not sure yet, but it's a pattern." That night, as darkness fell, they watched Duke begin his now familiar transformation. Around 8 p.m., he grew restless, pacing between the nursery door and their bedroom. By 9 p.m., he had taken his position beside William's crib, eyes fixed on the corner, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Robert sat in the rocking chair, watching both Duke in the corner. Eleanor had finally agreed to let William remain in the nursery, trusting Duke's protective nature, but insisted one of them stay with the baby at all times. "What are you trying to tell us, Duke?" Robert whispered. As if in response, Duke's growl deepened and his ears twitched forward. For a moment Robert thought he heard it again, that faint creaking sound from the night before. He rose from the chair and approached the corner slowly, placing his palm against the wall. Was it his imagination, or did he feel a slight vibration beneath his fingertips? Robert woke early the next morning, his architect's mind unable to rest after what he'd felt in the nursery corner. He set up his laptop on the kitchen table, determined to work from home and observe Duke's behavior throughout the day. Outside, a spring rain fell steadily, drumming against the old roof. "You don't have to cancel your meeting," Eleanor said as she prepared to leave for school. William securely fastened in his carrier. "I'm not comfortable leaving until I figure this out," Robert replied, eyes on Duke, who lay contentedly by the door, showing no signs of his nighttime anxiety. "Besides, I can review these blueprints just as easily here." Eleanor hesitated. "Should I take William to my mother's after school?" "Let's not overreact. Duke's not showing any aggression toward William, quite the opposite." After Eleanor and William left, Robert methodically documented Duke's behavior throughout the morning. The German Shepherd followed his typical routine, a brief patrol of the yard despite the rain, a nap in the living room, occasional checks at the windows when birds or squirrels caught his attention. At noon, Robert climbed the stairs to the nursery, Duke following closely. The room felt different in daylight, warm, peaceful, with colorful animals dancing across the walls from the mobile's shadow. Duke showed no concern about the corner now, even when Robert led him directly to it. "Nothing bothers you here during the day, huh, boy?" Robert murmured. He inspected the walls again, this time with a more critical eye. The house had been renovated multiple times over its long history, with the latest update occurring just before they purchased it. The real estate listing had proudly highlighted the modernized interior with preserved historical charm. As an architect, Robert had been drawn to the solid construction and character of the old farmhouse. Now he wondered what might be hidden behind its carefully preserved facade. By late afternoon, the rain had intensified, and Robert noticed a subtle shift in Duke's demeanor. Around 4 p.m., the dog began showing signs of restlessness, periodically glancing up the stairs toward the nursery. By 5 p.m., Duke had positioned himself at the foot of the staircase, his ears constantly pivoting as if listening for something only he could hear. Robert's phone rang, Martha calling to check on them. "How's Duke today?" she asked after preliminary greetings. "Calm all morning, but he's getting restless now. It seems to start around the same time each day." "I've been thinking about your situation," Martha said. "After the last big storm, I noticed water stains on my wall, the one that backs up to your nursery." Robert straightened. "You never mentioned that before." "Didn't think it was important until I started hearing Duke at night. Thomas used to say that water's the enemy of old houses, finds every weakness, creates new ones if given enough time." After ending the call, Robert went to check on Duke, who had moved to the top of the stairs and was now staring fixedly at the closed nursery door. "Want to go in, boy?" Duke's tail gave a single wag at the sound of Robert's voice, but his attention remained focused on the door. When Robert opened it, Duke brushed past him, immediately heading for the infamous corner. The room felt different now. As evening approached and the storm outside intensified, Robert noticed a distinct drop in temperature near the corner. The draft he'd felt before seemed stronger, and when he placed his hand against the wall, the vibration was unmistakable. Duke began to pace back and forth, his nails clicking against the wooden floor. His behavior wasn't yet the intense vigilance of nighttime, but Robert could see him transitioning into that state with each passing hour. Eleanor returned with William just after 6, hurrying in from the rain. "The creek at the end of the road is rising," she reported, handing a fussy William to Robert. "They're saying this might be the wettest spring in decades." As Eleanor warmed William's bottle in the kitchen, Robert carried the baby upstairs. The moment they entered the nursery, Duke's demeanor shifted dramatically. He positioned himself between William and the corner, a low whine escaping him. While feeding William in the rocking chair, Eleanor suddenly went still. "Do you hear that?" Robert listened intently. At first he heard nothing beyond the patter of rain and the gentle creak of the rocking chair. Then he caught it, a faint but distinct sound from within the wall, like wood straining against pressure. "That's what Duke's been hearing," Robert whispered. "It's so quiet," Eleanor said. "I'd never have noticed without listening specifically for it. For us, maybe. But for Duke, with his training and enhanced hearing." William finished his bottle and dozed off in Eleanor's arms. As she gently placed him in the crib, they both noticed the baby mobile spinning slightly, though there was no breeze from the window. "The draft is stronger tonight," Robert observed. Eleanor touched the wall and quickly pulled her hand back. "It feels cold, colder than it should." Duke had settled into his guard position, but unlike previous nights, he occasionally looked back at Robert and Eleanor, as if ensuring they were finally understanding his concerns. "I'm calling someone. First thing tomorrow," Robert said firmly. "A professional home inspector." That night they moved a small mattress into the nursery, taking turns staying with William while Duke maintained his vigilant watch. As midnight approached during Robert's shift, he noticed water gradually seeping through the corner's baseboards. Just a few drops, barely visible in the dim nightlight. But Duke had seen it too, and his growl deepened. Morning revealed a thin line of moisture along the baseboards where Robert had spotted water seeping through the night before. After a hurried breakfast, he made several phone calls, growing increasingly frustrated as each home inspector cited a 2-week waiting period for new appointments. "We don't have 2 weeks," he muttered after ending the 4th call. Eleanor, bouncing William gently in her arms, suggested, "Ask Martha if she has recommendations. Someone who knows these old houses." 20 minutes later, Robert was knocking on Martha's door. She answered in gardening attire despite the continuing drizzle outside. "Water in the corner?" she echoed when Robert explained the situation. "That's not good, especially with all this rain we've been having." She disappeared into her house, returning moments later with a business card. "Frank Reynolds. 40 years inspecting homes in this county. Knows more about old Vermont farmhouses than anyone alive. Tell him I sent you. He was friends with Thomas." Back home, Robert called the number, explaining their situation and emphasizing the urgency. To his relief, Frank agreed to come that afternoon. "Any friend of Martha and Thomas deserves priority," the inspector said. "Besides, I've learned to take it seriously when dogs get agitated about houses. They notice things long before our fancy equipment does." While waiting for Frank's arrival, Robert and Eleanor photographed the damp baseboards and the hairline cracks they discovered spreading across the ceiling near the problematic corner. Duke remained unusually alert despite it being daytime, periodically checking the corner and returning to William's side. Martha arrived shortly before Frank, bringing sandwiches and coffee. "Thought you might need sustenance," she said, setting down her basket. "And I wanted to be here for Frank's assessment. 2 old-timers remember more than one." Frank Reynolds arrived precisely at 3 o'clock. A tall, lean man in his late 60s with weathered hands and sharp blue eyes, beneath bushy gray eyebrows. He carried a toolbox of equipment and wore a utility vest covered in pockets. Duke approached him cautiously, sniffing his boots and hands before seeming to approve of his presence. "This must be the vigilant guardian I've heard about," Frank said, kneeling to meet Duke at eye level despite his age. "In 40 years of inspecting homes, I've never found a detection tool as accurate as a good dog's instincts." Frank listened attentively as Robert and Eleanor described Duke's behavior and their observations. He nodded, jotting notes in a small pad, but offering no immediate opinions. "Let me see this corner for myself," he finally said. In the nursery, Frank became methodical and focused. He checked the walls with levels and moisture meters, tapped surfaces while listening carefully, and examined the ceiling with a powerful flashlight. Duke stayed close, watching Frank's every move with apparent approval. "The '78 flood changed everything in this region," Frank commented while working. "Altered water tables, created underground streams where none existed before." Martha, who had followed them upstairs, nodded in agreement. The whole landscape transformed in a matter of days. Properties that never had water issues suddenly couldn't stay dry. "Were you here for that flood, Martha?" Eleanor asked. "Indeed I was. Water rose 6 feet in some parts of town. Many old houses couldn't withstand it. Foundations shifted, support structures compromised." Frank's equipment beeped as he pressed a moisture meter against the wall. "Significantly elevated readings here," he announced, frowning. "And look at this." He directed his thermal imaging device toward the corner, showing them the screen. "Temperature differential of nearly 8 degrees. "What does that mean?" Robert asked, though, as an architect, he already feared the answer. "It means there's likely water moving behind this wall," Frank explained. "And based on the thermal pattern, I'd guess it's following a path along an old plumbing line that's no longer in use." Duke whined softly, as if confirming Frank's assessment. "There's something else," Frank continued, running his hand along the seam where the walls met. "This corner isn't plumb anymore. The house has shifted, creating pressure points where it shouldn't. That creaking you're hearing? It's the sound of wood under stress." "How serious is it?" Eleanor asked, instinctively moving to William's crib. Frank's expression grew grave. "Serious enough that I recommend opening this wall immediately to assess the full extent of the damage. Water damage is rarely limited to what you can see." "Could it be dangerous?" Robert pressed. "With the continued rain we're having, and based on what your dog is telling us?" Frank nodded slowly. "Yes, it could become dangerous." Martha placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Best to know what you're dealing with, dear. Ignoring problems in old houses only leads to bigger ones." Frank knelt to examine the baseboards where the moisture had appeared. "There's evidence of an old plumbing system that was likely decommissioned during renovations, but not properly removed. If water's finding its way in through that route, it could be undermining structural elements we can't see." "How soon can we get this fixed?" Robert asked, professional training and parental concern merging into urgent focus. "I know a contractor who specializes in structural repair of historic homes," Frank replied. "Mike Thompson. If I call him today, he might be able to start tomorrow, especially if I explain the situation." As Frank made the call, Duke finally relaxed slightly, lying down near William's crib but keeping his eyes on the adults, as if satisfied that humans were finally addressing his concerns. "Mike can be here first thing tomorrow," Frank announced after ending his call. "He'll bring his crew and the equipment needed to open this wall safely." As they walked Frank to the door, he turned to Robert with a serious expression. "Your dog knew exactly what was wrong before any of my fancy tools could detect it. That's not just training, that's something special." At 7 the next morning, a truck bearing the logo, Thompson Restoration and Repair, pulled into the Carsons' driveway. Mike Thompson emerged, a stocky man in his mid-50s with calloused hands and observant eyes. 3 workers followed, unloading equipment with practiced efficiency. Duke was at the window instantly, watching the new arrivals with intense interest. When Robert opened the door to greet them, Duke pushed forward, his nose working overtime as he inspected each person. "Well, hello there," Mike said, kneeling despite his work clothes. "You must be the one who sounded the alarm." Duke sniffed Mike thoroughly, then stepped back with what appeared to be recognition in his eyes. He seems to know you," Robert observed. Mike studied Duke more carefully. "Wait a minute. This is Duke, isn't it? From the New England Search and Rescue Unit." Robert stared in astonishment. "Yes, but how did you—" I used to train dogs for rescue operations before I switched to construction, Mike explained, genuine emotion in his voice as he gently rubbed Duke's ears. I worked with this fellow during his early training days. He was one of the best we ever had. The coincidence left Robert speechless. What were the odds that the contractor sent to fix their home had once trained their dog? Small world, Eleanor murmured. William balanced on her hip as she joined them. The smallest, Mike agreed, standing. And if Duke's concerned about something in your house, we'd better take it very seriously. He was exceptional at detecting structural instabilities. The crew wasted no time, laying protective coverings over the nursery floor and furniture before preparing to open the wall in the corner. Duke positioned himself at what seemed a respectful distance, watching with unwavering attention. We'll start with a small opening, Mike explained, marking a rectangular section on the wall. Once we see what we're dealing with, we can develop the right approach. As the first section of drywall was carefully removed, a musty smell filled the room. Duke's ears perked forward, but he remained calm, as if he'd been expecting exactly what they found. There's our first problem, Mike said, directing his flashlight into the cavity. The old plumbing was never properly capped when they modernized. It's been slowly leaking, probably for years. Robert peered into the opening, his architect's training immediately recognizing the severity of what he was seeing. The wooden support beam visible within the wall showed significant darkening and deterioration. We need to open this up more, Mike said, his tone now urgent. I need to see how far this damage extends. As the workers expanded the opening, the full extent of the problem became horrifyingly clear. The main support beam running through that corner had rotted significantly at its core. Black mold spread extensively throughout the wall cavity. And most alarming of all, a section of the foundation below showed signs of erosion from constant water exposure. My God, Robert whispered, the professional implications hitting him immediately. Mike's expression was grave. This beam is supporting a significant portion of your roof and second floor. The rot goes deep. It's essentially hollow in the center. Eleanor clutched William tighter, her face pale. What does that mean? It means Duke was right to be concerned, Mike answered. This structural member is critically compromised. The creaking you've been hearing is the sound of wood fibers failing under the weight they're supposed to be supporting. Could it have collapsed? Robert asked, already knowing the answer. Mike nodded slowly. With enough additional weight, like heavy snowfall or during a severe storm, yes, this entire corner could have given way without warning. The reality of what might have happened, what could have happened while William slept in his crib, hit them all simultaneously. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Duke, who sat calmly watching the proceedings, his mission finally understood. How long would it have taken for someone to notice without Duke's warning? She asked. Weeks, maybe months, Mike replied honestly. By then, it might have been catastrophic. Robert felt a wave of professional shame wash over him. As an architect, he should have detected these issues during their home inspection. His previous career failure, a building that had shown structural weakness, flooded back into his memory. Don't blame yourself, Mike said, reading Robert's expression. This kind of damage is deliberately hidden behind finishes. Without opening the wall, even professionals miss it. That's why Duke's behavior was so important. Duke approached Robert and pressed against his leg, as if offering comfort. Robert knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. You knew all along, didn't you? You were trying to tell us. The repairs will be extensive, Mike continued, outlining what needed to be done. Replacing the beam, treating for mold, reinforcing the foundation, and implementing proper waterproofing. How long will it take? Eleanor asked. 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what else we find. You'll need to move William's crib to another room in the meantime. Rather than avoiding the construction area, Duke appointed himself unofficial supervisor, watching the workers carefully and sometimes barking when they approached sections that hadn't yet been inspected. He's doing what he was trained to do, Mike explained with a smile. Identifying hazards and alerting humans. Old habits die hard. That evening, as the family prepared to move William's crib into their bedroom temporarily, Duke performed a final inspection of the now exposed corner. As the workers packed up for the day, he looked at Robert with what seemed like satisfaction that humans had finally understood his warning. The Carson household quickly adapted to their new temporary arrangements. William's crib now stood in the corner of the master bedroom, while construction sounds filled their days as Mike's crew worked diligently on the extensive repairs. On the third morning of construction, Eleanor noticed William felt unusually warm during his early feeding. By noon, the baby's temperature had climbed to 101 degrees, and a distinct flush colored his cheeks. "It's probably from all the dust and environmental changes," Dr. Winters said when Eleanor called for advice. "Keep him hydrated and monitor his temperature. If it goes higher or doesn't improve by tomorrow, bring him in." Eleanor set up a humidifier in the bedroom and gently sponged William's forehead with cool water. Despite the chaos of workers moving through the house and the constant noise of construction, Duke refused to leave William's side, maintaining a protective position by the crib. "Even with all that racket, he won't budge," Eleanor told Robert when he checked in during a break from overseeing the repairs. "He knows William needs him more than we need another supervisor downstairs," Robert replied, with a small smile. By evening, William's fever had increased, and he became fussy and difficult to console. Duke grew increasingly alert, watching the baby intently and occasionally whining softly when William cried. "I'm getting worried," Eleanor admitted as midnight approached and William still couldn't sleep comfortably. "His temperature's up to 102 now." Robert was reaching for his phone to call the pediatrician's emergency line when they heard a vehicle pull into their driveway. Looking out the window, they were surprised to see Dr. Winters climbing out of her car, medical bag in hand. "Martha called me," she explained when they opened the door. "Said she heard the baby crying and thought I should check on both my patients." Dr. Winters examined William thoroughly, while Duke watched from a respectful distance, never taking his eyes off the proceedings. "Ear infection," she diagnosed. "Not uncommon when there's construction dust and changes in environment. I brought some antibiotics that should help him feel better by morning." After administering the first dose and ensuring William was resting more comfortably, Dr. Winters turned her attention to Duke. "And how's our hero doing with all this change?" she asked, kneeling to examine him. "He refuses to leave William, especially now that he's sick," Eleanor said, "even with all the noise and strangers in the house." Dr. Winters nodded thoughtfully, checking Duke's eyes and ears. "While we humans rely on 5 senses, Duke experiences the world through at least 7 distinct sensory systems. His hearing extends into frequencies we can't perceive. His sense of smell is thousands of times more sensitive than ours, and he can detect subtle vibrations through the floor." She gently felt along his back and shoulders. His search and rescue training would have honed these abilities even further, teaching him to associate certain sensory inputs with potential danger. "Mike mentioned that Duke was specifically trained to detect structural instabilities," Robert said. "That makes perfect sense, Doctor," Winters replied. "Search and rescue dogs who work in collapsed buildings need to identify which areas are safe to traverse. Duke would have been taught to recognize the sounds and smells of compromised structures." Before leaving, Dr. Winters paused at the doorway. "What you're seeing now, his protection of William during illness, goes beyond training. That's pure instinct and devotion." The next morning, William's fever had broken, though he remained somewhat fussy. Duke continued his vigil, only leaving the bedroom for brief necessary breaks. Mike came upstairs during lunch to check on them. "How's the little man doing?" "Better," Eleanor replied. "Thanks for keeping the noise down this morning." "Least we could do," Mike said, his eyes moving to Duke. "And our supervisor here wouldn't have it any other way." Mike sat on the edge of the bed, his expression growing thoughtful as he watched Duke. You know, when I was training him years ago, we knew he was special. Some dogs learn the mechanics of rescue, but Duke understood the purpose behind it. What made you switch from dog training to construction? Robert asked. After the New England floods, I helped with rebuilding efforts, Mike explained. Realized I could prevent disasters instead of just responding to them. Proper construction saves lives before they need saving. As the days passed and William recovered, Duke developed a routine of dividing his time between guarding the baby and inspecting the ongoing repairs. The workers had grown fond of their four-legged supervisor, often joking about Duke's critical eye on their work. He actually growled when we brought in that shipment of lumber yesterday, one worker told Robert. We thought he was just being protective until we noticed it had water damage, had to send the whole batch back. Martha became a regular visitor, bringing homemade meals and helping with William while construction continued. One afternoon, she sat with Eleanor while Robert was consulting with Mike about the repairs. I never told you much about my granddaughter, Martha said quietly, watching Duke curled protectively near William's playmat. Eleanor looked up from her grading papers. No, you haven't. Her name was Emily. She was staying with us during a storm much like the one that revealed your house problems. Martha's eyes grew distant with memory. The ceiling in the guest bedroom had been showing signs, water stains, small cracks, but Thomas had been too busy to investigate properly. She paused, her hands stilling in her lap. During the night, the entire section collapsed. Emily was only 5. Eleanor reached out to clasp Martha's weathered hand. I'm so sorry. That's why I insisted Frank come immediately when you mentioned Duke's behavior, Martha continued. I believe some souls are sent to protect us from repeating past tragedies. That evening, as Robert checked on the extensive repairs now visible throughout the nursery walls, he found Mike standing quietly, watching Duke, who had returned to inspect the day's progress. You know, Mike said without turning, in all my years of training rescue dogs, I only saw a handful with Duke's level of dedication. Most dogs do the job because they're trained to, but some, the special ones, they do it because they understand what's at stake. Robert nodded, a lump forming in his throat as he thought about how close they had come to disaster, and how persistently Duke had tried to warn them. He never gave up trying to tell us, Robert said, even when we doubted him. That's what makes him extraordinary, Mike replied simply, and why we should always listen to those who see what we cannot, even when their language isn't our own. News of Duke's discovery and the dangerous structural damage in the Carson home spread quickly through the small Vermont community. Within days, several neighbors had stopped by, ostensibly to check on the family, but clearly curious about the extensive construction, and the dog who had detected the hidden danger. Mrs. Collins from down the street called this morning, Eleanor told Robert over breakfast. She wants to know if Mike could inspect her place when he's done here. Apparently she's been hearing strange noises in her attic for months. Robert nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Frank mentioned he's received 6 new inspection requests this week alone. Duke's becoming quite the local celebrity. As if aware he was being discussed, Duke looked up from his position near William's high chair, tail thumping against the floor. The local newspaper sent a reporter to interview the Carson family, resulting in a front-page feature titled Hero Dog Saves, Family from Hidden Danger. The article detailed Duke's persistent warnings and included quotes from Mike and Frank about the potential catastrophe that had been averted. When an animal tries this consistently to communicate something, we would be wise to pay attention, Frank was quoted saying. In 40 years of home inspection, I've learned that animals often detect problems long before our instruments can. Following the newspaper story, the town library organized a community meeting about home safety in older structures. Robert, initially reluctant to speak publicly given his professional setback, found himself persuaded by Eleanor to share their experience. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. Martha sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Robert explained how Duke had protected their family. As an architect, I should have noticed the warning signs, Robert admitted to the crowd, But sometimes dangers hide beyond what our human senses can detect. Duke taught us to listen differently, to pay attention to warnings we might otherwise dismiss. Frank Reynolds followed with practical advice about inspecting older homes, particularly those affected by the region's changing water patterns. Throughout the presentation, Duke lay calmly at Robert's feet, occasionally acknowledging the admiring glances from audience members. After the meeting, several families approached Robert to ask about Duke and share concerns about their own homes. One elderly gentleman revealed that his dog had been scratching persistently at a specific section of flooring for weeks. "I thought he was just being difficult," the man confessed. "After hearing your story, I've called Frank for an inspection." Eleanor, inspired by the community's response, began drafting a children's book about Duke's experience. "I want children to understand that animals communicate in important ways, even when we don't immediately understand them," she explained to Martha as they watched William play with Duke in the garden. Martha nodded approvingly. "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. Sometimes the very young and the non-human see things most clearly." The community's interest led to the establishment of a fund to help families with limited means pay for home inspections, officially named the Duke Fund, in honor of their inspirational canine neighbor. The local bank agreed to match donations, and within weeks they had raised enough to support inspections for a dozen elderly homeowners. As Duke's story spread, other consequences emerged. The local animal shelter reported increased interest in adopting rescue dogs, particularly those with service or working backgrounds. The veterinary clinic where Dr. Winters practiced began offering free seminars on understanding animal behavior and communication. "Duke's become quite the community ambassador," Mike commented one afternoon as he and Robert reviewed the progress of the repairs. "He's changed how people view their homes and their animals." Robert watched as Duke methodically inspected the newly installed support beam, seemingly approving of the solid, treated lumber that had replaced the rotted original. "He's always been extraordinary," Robert replied. "We just needed to learn how to listen." For Duke, the attention seemed largely irrelevant. His focus remained where it had always been, on protecting his family, particularly William, and ensuring their home was safe. As workers finished reinforcing the wall that day, Duke performed his usual inspection before returning to William's side. Mission accomplished, but vigilance undiminished. News of Duke's discovery and the dangerous structural damage in the Carson home spread quickly through the small Vermont community. Within days, several neighbors had stopped by, ostensibly to check on the family, but clearly curious about the extensive construction and the dog who had detected the hidden danger. "Mrs. Collins from down the street called this morning," Eleanor told Robert over breakfast. "She wants to know if Mike could inspect her place when he's done here. Apparently she's been hearing strange noises in her attic for months." Robert nodded, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Frank mentioned he's received 6 new inspection requests this week alone. Duke's becoming quite the local celebrity." As if aware he was being discussed, Duke looked up from his position near William's high chair, tail thumping against the floor. The local newspaper sent a reporter to interview the Carson family, resulting in a front-page feature titled "Hero Dog Saves Family from Hidden Danger." The article detailed Duke's persistent warnings and included quotes from Mike and Frank about the potential catastrophe that had been averted. "When an animal tries this consistently to communicate something, we would be wise to pay attention," Frank was quoted saying. "In 40 years of home inspection, I've learned that animals often detect problems long before our instruments can." Following the newspaper story, the town library organized a community meeting about home safety in older structures. Robert, initially reluctant to speak publicly given his professional setback, found himself persuaded by Eleanor to share their experience. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. Martha sat in the front row, beaming with pride as Robert explained how Duke had protected their family. "As an architect, I should have noticed the warning signs," Robert admitted to the crowd, But sometimes dangers hide beyond what our human senses can detect. Duke taught us to listen differently, to pay attention to warnings we might otherwise dismiss. Frank Reynolds followed with practical advice about inspecting older homes, particularly those affected by the region's changing water patterns. Throughout the presentation, Duke lay calmly at Robert's feet, occasionally acknowledging the admiring glances from audience members. After the meeting, several families approached Robert to ask about Duke and share concerns about their own homes. One elderly gentleman revealed that his dog had been scratching persistently at a specific section of flooring for weeks. "I thought he was just being difficult," the man confessed. "After hearing your story, I've called Frank for an inspection." Eleanor, inspired by the community's response, began drafting a children's book about Duke's experience. "I want children to understand that animals communicate in important ways, even when we don't immediately understand them," she explained to Martha as they watched William play with Duke in the garden. Martha nodded approvingly. "When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources. Sometimes the very young and the non-human see things most clearly." The community's interest led to the establishment of a fund to help families with limited means pay for home inspections, officially named the Duke Fund, in honor of their inspirational canine neighbor. The local bank agreed to match donations, and within weeks they had raised enough to support inspections for a dozen elderly homeowners. As Duke's story spread, other consequences emerged. The local animal shelter reported increased interest in adopting rescue dogs, particularly those with service or working backgrounds. The veterinary clinic where Dr. Winters practiced began offering free seminars on understanding animal behavior and communication. "Duke's become quite the community ambassador," Mike commented one afternoon as he and Robert reviewed the progress of the repairs. "He's changed how people view their homes and their animals." Robert watched as Duke methodically inspected the newly installed support beam, seemingly approving of the solid, treated lumber that had replaced the rotted original. "He's always been extraordinary," Robert replied. "We just needed to learn how to listen." For Duke, the attention seemed largely irrelevant. His focus remained where it had always been, on protecting his family, particularly William, and ensuring their home was safe. As workers finished reinforcing the wall that day, Duke performed his usual inspection before returning to William's side, mission accomplished, but vigilance undiminished. The warmth emanating from the kitchen wall was puzzling and concerning. Robert pressed his palm against the drywall, feeling an unnatural heat that shouldn't be present. "Something's not right," he murmured. Martha had joined them in the kitchen, her weathered face etched with concern in the lantern light. "Could be electrical," she suggested, eyeing the wall warily. "Thomas always said water and wiring make dangerous neighbors." Duke's whine grew more insistent. He pawed at the baseboard, then looked up at Robert with an urgency that transcended the need for words. Robert's mind flashed back to Mike's explanation of the recent repairs. They had replaced wiring in the nursery corner but hadn't yet inspected the adjoining walls. "We need to turn off the main breaker," Robert decided, grabbing a flashlight from the emergency kit. "I think there's water reaching the electrical system." As Robert moved toward the basement door, a sharp crack of thunder shook the house. The storm was directly overhead now, rain pounding against the roof with relentless fury. Duke's ears perked up, his attention suddenly diverted to the ceiling above. "Robert!" Eleanor's voice called from upstairs, tight with fear. "I think there's water coming through the ceiling in our bedroom." The night had become a cascade of emergencies. Robert hesitated, torn between the electrical danger downstairs and the new threat near William. Duke made the decision for him, abandoning the kitchen wall to dash upstairs, his nails clicking rapidly on the wooden steps. "Go," Martha urged, already moving toward the basement door. "I know where the electrical panel is. Thomas helped wire this neighborhood in the 70s. I'll handle it." Robert raced upstairs to find Eleanor standing in their bedroom doorway, William clutched tightly in her arms. Water was indeed seeping through the ceiling, forming a growing stain directly above their bed. "It's coming from the attic," Eleanor said, raising her voice over the storm's howl. I heard dripping and moved William just before it started coming through. Duke wasn't looking at the ceiling leak. Instead, he had taken position by their bedroom window, growling softly at something outside. Robert directed his flashlight beam through the rain-lashed glass, but saw only darkness and the thrashing limbs of the old maple tree beside the house. A tremendous gust of wind slammed against the house, followed by an ominous cracking sound from above. The ceiling stain expanded rapidly, water now dripping steadily onto their bed. We need to get to lower ground, Robert decided, the living room away from the exterior walls. As they gathered essential supplies for William, Duke's behavior shifted again. Instead of leading them toward the stairs, he blocked their path, growling more insistently. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor asked, clutching William tighter as he began to fuss. Duke moved to Eleanor's side and did something he'd never done before. He gently but firmly gripped her sleeve with his teeth, tugging her toward the hallway bathroom. "He wants us to go this way," Robert realized, remembering what Mike had said about Duke's rescue training. This is how he was taught to guide people to safety. Trusting Duke's instincts, they followed him into the hallway bathroom, the only room in the house with no exterior walls or windows. They had barely closed the door behind them when a tremendous crash echoed from their bedroom, followed by the sound of splintering wood and rushing water. "The maple branch," Robert whispered, meeting Eleanor's wide-eyed gaze in the flashlight beam. "It must have broken through the window." Duke sat calmly by the bathroom door, his earlier urgency replaced with quiet vigilance. Whatever danger he had sensed in their exit path, he had successfully guided them away from it. Martha's voice called up from downstairs a few minutes later. "Power's off at the main. Is everyone all right up there?" "We're safe in the hallway bathroom," Robert called back. "Stay where you are until we know it's safe to move around." They spent nearly an hour in the small bathroom, listening to the storm's fury gradually diminish. William eventually dozed off in Eleanor's arms, while Duke maintained his position by the door, occasionally rising to press his ear against it as if monitoring the situation outside. When the rain finally subsided to a gentle patter, Robert cautiously opened the bathroom door. The hallway was intact, but water had pooled outside their bedroom. Opening the bedroom door revealed the devastation. A large maple branch had crashed through the window, allowing rain to pour in directly over where their bed stood soaked and partially collapsed. "If we'd been sleeping there," Eleanor whispered, unable to finish the thought. Duke led them carefully downstairs, where Martha waited with hot tea she'd prepared on the camping stove from their emergency kit. "I called Mike," she informed them. "He's on his way. Said we were lucky. 2 other homes in the area had complete roof failures." As they huddled in the living room waiting for Mike's arrival, Robert found himself constantly reaching down to touch Duke's head, overwhelmed with gratitude. Once again, their extraordinary companion had sensed danger before it became catastrophic, guiding them to safety when they might have chosen a more dangerous path. Outside, the worst of the storm had passed, but Duke remained alert, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen wall that had first triggered his alarm. Whatever danger lurked there hadn't been resolved, merely overshadowed by more immediate threats. 2 weeks after the storm, the Carson home stood transformed. What had begun as repairs to a single corner had evolved into a comprehensive renovation addressing years of hidden issues throughout the structure. The maple branch incident had revealed additional weaknesses in the roof and attic that might have remained undetected for years. "It's like the house needed to be completely healed," Eleanor remarked as she and Robert walked through the renovated nursery, now bright with fresh paint and improved lighting. The repairs had been extensive. The support beam replaced, foundation reinforced, electrical system updated, and comprehensive waterproofing installed throughout the structure. Mike had even discovered and properly sealed the original well shaft beneath the kitchen, the source of the mysterious heat Duke had detected during the storm. The old wooden cover had been smoldering due to contact with exposed wiring, a potentially catastrophic fire hazard. "Ready for the final touch?" Robert asked, gesturing to the newly built corner, where Duke had first sounded his alarm. Eleanor nodded, cradling William against her shoulder. The baby had grown noticeably in the weeks since their ordeal, now more alert and responsive to his surroundings. Martha arrived for the small ceremony they had planned, carrying a framed painting created by a local artist, a portrait of Duke in his former search and rescue uniform, standing protectively beside a crib. The inscription at the bottom read simply, "Always listening." "For the guardian of your home," Martha said, handing the frame to Robert. "It's perfect," he replied, voice thick with emotion. Mike had suggested a special tradition from his construction days, allowing Duke to place his paw print in the fresh concrete of the new foundation section. Now, as the family gathered in the nursery, Robert beckoned Duke to the corner. "This is your spot, buddy," he said softly. "You found the danger here first." Duke approached the corner, sniffing carefully at the new construction. His ears moved forward, then relaxed. He circled the area once, twice, and then, seemingly satisfied, lay down peacefully exactly where he had once stood, guard with such vigilance. "I think that's his seal of approval," Mike said from the doorway, where he'd arrived to witness the moment. Eleanor hung the painting on the wall above the corner, completing the nursery's transformation. "Now William will always remember who kept him safe, even when he's too young to remember these weeks." That evening, they moved William's crib back into the nursery with a mixture of emotion, relief that the danger had passed, gratitude for Duke's protection, and a new awareness of the responsibility contained in these old walls. Duke performed a final inspection of the room, methodically checking each corner, window, and doorway before settling into his bed beside the crib. For the first time in weeks, there was no growl, no alert stance, only the peaceful vigilance of a guardian who knew his charge was now truly safe. Outside, a gentle spring rain began to fall, very different from the destructive storm they had weathered. The new gutters and drainage system handled the water effortlessly, directing it away from the foundation that had been so vulnerable before. "It's strange," Robert said as he and Eleanor watched the rain from their porch, Duke lying contentedly at their feet. "I spent my career designing buildings to protect people, then nearly missed the danger in our own home." "We all have blind spots," Eleanor replied. "That's why we need different perspectives, even non-human ones." The renovations had changed more than just their physical home. Robert had found new purpose, consulting with a local architectural firm specializing in renovating historic homes with modern safety standards. Eleanor had completed her children's book manuscript about Duke, with illustrations by the same artist who had painted his portrait. The changes extended beyond their family as well. Several homes in the community had undergone inspections and repairs following their example. The Duke Fund had already helped 5 elderly residents address potentially dangerous structural issues in their homes. Martha had embraced a new role as a volunteer at the local animal rescue center, specifically helping senior citizens connect with pets needing homes. "Every older person needs a guardian," she often said, "and every guardian needs someone to protect." As dusk settled over their Vermont hillside, the lights of their home glowed warmly against the darkening sky. The house stood solid and secure, its wounds healed, its weaknesses transformed into new strength. Duke rose from his position on the porch and quietly moved to the door, looking back at Robert and Eleanor expectantly. It was time for William's evening routine, and Duke never missed his opportunity to oversee the baby's transition to sleep. Inside the nursery, as Eleanor settled William into his crib, Duke took his place in the corner, not with the tense vigilance of before, but with the quiet confidence of a guardian who had fulfilled his purpose and would continue to watch over what he cherished most. The sound of William's gentle breathing filled the peaceful room, a stark contrast to the anxious nights they had endured. Duke's eyes met Robert's, a moment of understanding passing between them that transcended species and language. Some bonds, formed in the face of danger and forged through trust, become unbreakable. And some guardians never stop watching, even when the danger has passed. 6 months had passed since the storm that had tested their home and family. Autumn painted the Vermont hills in brilliant reds and golds, and a crisp breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves through the Carson property. The renovated farmhouse stood strong against the changing seasons, its new support beams, updated wiring, and reinforced foundation hidden beneath the restored historical charm. Robert stood at the edge of their property, watching as Eleanor chased 9-month-old William across the lawn. The baby had learned to crawl with remarkable speed and was now pulling himself up on furniture, eager to explore his expanding world. Duke followed at a respectful distance, allowing William independence while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. "He still doesn't take his eyes off him," Martha remarked, joining Robert by the old stone wall that marked their property line. At 79, she remained spry, though she now carried a walking stick on her outdoor excursions. "Some things don't change," Robert agreed, "though I haven't heard him growl at corners in months." The community gathering later that afternoon brought together many of the people who had been touched by Duke's story. The event was being held at the town library to celebrate the official launch of Eleanor's children's book, The Night Growl: How Duke Saved Our Home. The local bookstore had already sold out its first shipment, with proceeds benefiting both the animal shelter and the home safety fund now established in Duke's name. Robert had become a regular speaker at home safety workshops across the county, combining his architectural knowledge with their personal experience. His professional confidence had returned, strengthened by the perspective that near disaster had provided. The architectural firm he consulted for had even created a new service specifically focused on historic home safety assessments. As guests arrived at the library, Duke greeted each person with dignified composure, seemingly aware of his role as the event's inspiration. Children approached him with gentle hands, coached by parents who had read advance copies of Eleanor's book. Mike Thompson arrived with several members of his crew, all wearing matching company shirts with a new logo that incorporated a silhouette of a German Shepherd. His business had expanded significantly, specializing in addressing hidden structural issues in historic homes. "We've added a new step to our inspection process," Mike told Robert proudly. "We bring in trained dogs from the local rescue organization to check properties. After our technical assessment, they've found issues our equipment missed in 3 different homes already." Dr. Winters attended as well, using the opportunity to distribute information about animal behavior and communication. "Animals speak to us constantly," she explained to an attentive group. "The question isn't whether they're communicating, but whether we're listening." The highlight of the afternoon came when the mayor presented Duke with an official Community Hero Medal, specially crafted to attach to his collar. As Eleanor held William near the podium, the baby suddenly reached out toward Duke and took his first tentative steps, toddling 3 paces before falling into the soft comfort of Duke's fur. The room erupted in applause and emotional exclamations at the perfect timing. Duke remained steady, allowing William to use him as support to stand again, his tail wagging gently with what could only be described as pride. "It's like he knew," Eleanor whispered to Robert, "like he waited for this moment." As winter approached, the first snow dusted their property, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas. Duke developed a new habit, sitting by the window whenever it rained or snowed, watching the weather with alert but calm attention. No longer anxious about invisible dangers, but still vigilant, a guardian adapted to peacetime. On the 1-year anniversary of moving into their home, Robert installed a small bronze plaque beside their front door. It read simply, "Protected by Duke, who heard the danger before we could see it." That evening, as the first serious snowfall of the season began, the family gathered in the living room. Duke completed his nightly patrol, checking each room with methodical care before settling contentedly by the fireplace. William, now steady on his feet, toddled over and gently patted Duke's head before curling up against his side. "In all my years of training rescue dogs," Mike had once told Robert, "I only saw a handful with Duke's level of awareness. He doesn't just detect problems, he understands their significance." Looking at his son nestled safely against Duke's protective form, Robert felt the truth of those words more deeply than ever. In life, we're fortunate if we find a friend willing to save us before we even know we need saving, Robert mused to Eleanor and Martha as they watched from the couch. And sometimes those friends don't speak our language at all. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their now secure home in peaceful white. Duke lifted his head briefly, ears perking as he listened to the house settling. Not with alarm, but with the satisfied vigilance of a guardian who knows his family is safe. He had completed his mission, transforming not just their home, but their understanding of communication, protection, and the profound bonds that can form between species. As William drifted to sleep against Duke's warm side, the German shepherd's eyes met Robert's across the room. In that gaze lay everything that needed to be said between them, a silent acknowledgement of a promise kept and a future secured. Some heroes wear uniforms, some perform dramatic rescues, but the greatest guardians are those who simply refuse to stop warning us until we finally understand the message they've been trying to deliver all along. In his quiet, persistent way, Duke had taught them the most important lesson of all. Sometimes true safety begins with simply learning to listen. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next videos.